Hey, folks, good evening and welcome to Phantoms and Monsters Radio. Thank you for joining me this evening. I want to welcome all new listeners and members to the channel, and as well as first timers in the chat. Now, for as long as I've been collecting and receiving eyewitness and experiencer reports, occasionally there have been a few terrifying accounts that are included in the mix. Fear from the unknown can become extremely intense. So, this presentation tonight will describe personal reports that have literally changed the experiencer's life. And as an experiencer myself, I can attest to the sudden shock and disbelief that accompanies these incidents. So, sit back, place yourself in the shoes of those people who demonstrated courage by coming forward and reporting. So let's go ahead and get started, and we'll go through these encounter reports together.
We live in a reality of phantoms and monsters. They exist among us, and sometimes they win. Even the devil was an angel once. The world has its own rules, and these rules are not human. Some of us seek answers to the origin and existence of cryptids and the unexplained. Join us as we venture beyond the known and accepted boundaries. Welcome to our nightmare. I think you're going to like it.
So before I go any further, I just want to mention that this channel is made possible by you clicking on the subscribe and like buttons, and by you sharing our programming. Super chat and super thanks donations are appreciated. You can click the dollar icon located below the chat box. And the Buy Me a Coffee link is also shown below, so thanks for your consideration. Now, your comments are always welcome. Tell me which accounts you find interesting in the presentation or suggestions for upcoming shows. I want to thank our chat moderators, Bernadette, Marla, Thomas, and Mike, for their commitment to me and the channel, and being here every week. Thank you again. Now, if you're in the chat and have a question, please use all caps, and I'll try to get to each one after the presentation. So, terrifying encounters. Maybe you won't find them terrifying. I don't know. But anyway, in this first account, the witness states to me, now this incident took place near Wheeling, West Virginia during the winter of 2002. Now, I've told a few people who I can trust for their honest opinion. Ever since it occurred, I've been puzzled and frightened. I'm going to be specific and honest on all the details. Please don't judge me, but my girlfriend and I used to go to a local treatment center for opiate addiction and counseling. So since starting treatment, I have remained clean, and I'm proud of that. It's been difficult, but with diligence and support, we've both gotten through it, though. I can honestly say that this incident I'm about to describe made breaking my dependency more difficult. Now, many of our appointments were in the evening around 5 to 6 p.m. The center is about a mile off the interstate on a wooded road with a few other businesses around. It can be very dark. It can be a very dark road even before the sun goes down. Now, on this day, it was about 5:15 p.m. and dark, except for a few sparsely placed streetlights. It was extremely cold, and there was about an inch or so of snow on the ground. Now, we had just driven off the interstate exit onto the wooded road when we noticed someone ahead of us on the right shoulder walking towards the center. I thought it might be another patient, so I asked my girlfriend if she knew who it was and that we could give him, a lift. So as we approached, I slowed down to get a good look at the person. Now, when I got nearer, the figure stopped and turned its head and looked directly at us. What I witnessed was the most terrifying thing I've ever seen. It had dark colored clothing and a wooded jacket of some kind. The face, well, it just wasn't human. It had a huge, evil smile on its face. The smile literally went from one side of the face to the other, and the teeth were enormous, but not sharp. The teeth reminded me of the horse teeth, and the overall expression was like that of the Joker from the animated Batman TV cartoon. I remember my girlfriend gasped and ducked to hide her face. Now, we didn't stop, but I had to get another look. I needed to figure out what it was. I turned the car around at a driveway and went back. My girlfriend quickly crawled into the back seat and covered herself up. She didn't want any part of this. I turned around and reached the spot where we had seen it, no more than 30 seconds, but it was gone. There was nowhere this thing could have gone. There is a high link fence between the road and the edge of the woods, and on the other side of the road is a creek. But this thing just simply vanished. Now, another car was coming from the directions of the interstate and slowed to see if everything was all right. I asked if they had seen anyone walking on the shoulder, but they said they hadn't. Now, after we couldn't find it, I asked my girlfriend to describe to me what she saw. She also compared it to the Joker. We're still a couple and have talked about this experience in detail many times. I don't know what it was, but I know it was not human. It seemed evil. I felt it deep in my soul. I know how it comes across, but I assure you this incident is 100% true. In the 18 months since we witnessed this thing, I still have not received any plausible explanation. Was it natural, which I doubt, or a real monster? I'd appreciate your thoughts. So, I remember this account when I originally read it. In fact, I referred it to another researcher who was interested in humanoid and alien hybrids. That researcher is no longer with us, so I don't remember acquiring a theory from him. Now, I've read of other accounts of similar humanoids in different situations, and I'd be interested in reading similar accounts and thoughts on similar type of humanoids. The fact that these grinning humanoids, and occasionally I do get one. It's such a strange phenomena, but it is what it is. So this next account, 30 years later, a federal land officer comes forward to report an alien encounter that he experienced as a young boy in Colorado. Now he states, I was sleeping on the couch at my parents' house in Fort Lupton, Colorado. I was 20 years old. It was May 31st, 1986. When I noticed the light outside the window behind the couch. I looked out the window and approximately 200 feet from the window on the open grass on a concrete basketball court, I saw approximately 4 feet off the ground a bright white light, which I later decided was a rip in space. The only way I can describe it. The bright light or hole was probably only 3 to 4 feet in diameter. I saw 3 to 5 aliens, or whatever you want to call them, exit out of the hole. Somehow I knew that they were going to come over to where I was, and this terrified me. I did not actually see them walk from a basketball court and over the lawn to the window, which was approximately 1.5 feet from my body. So it's the couch between me and the window. On the outside of the window, I remember 3 of the gray aliens were staring down at me. I tried to move, but my entire body was not responding, and I was frozen. Frozen is probably the wrong word. It was like I was a quadriplegic or something. The whole thing that I could move, the only thing I could move was my eyelids and my eyes so I could look over and see them staring at me. Now, their faces were approximately 3 feet at the most away from mine, still looking through the window directly into my face. I was fully awake, and this continued for, I'm guessing, somewhere between 15 minutes to a half an hour. I know that seems like a big variance for one who is describing something that occurred when they were completely awake, but it was a terrifying experience, and I suspect a minute may have lasted in my mind forever. Subsequently, I discovered that people had sleep paralysis and described something like this. However, this was not sleep paralysis. I was wide awake and aware, and I knew what I saw, so the paralysis started sometime after I saw them come out of the light or the basketball court, and I was lying back on the couch. At some point, they paralyzed me. They seemed to enjoy it. I seemed to be either reading their thoughts or something to that, or more correctly, they communicated that to me without using any type of speech. Now, other than staring at me, I don't know what else they were trying to accomplish. During this encounter, I was struggling with all my might to try to move even my little finger. I could feel my body all over, but I couldn't move it. I tried and I tried to fight them, but it just, to get away from them. I would have gone down the hallway to my room and picked up my 243 to blow them away if I could have, but I couldn't move. Then they left. I did not see how they exited, but I imagine it was the same hole. Now, I have distinct feeling that this has happened several times. It may have happened again, but that was the only incident I actually remember. Possibly I remember them when I was 5 years old in Missoula, Montana, but that could have been just a bad dream. I did tell some family members and a couple of friends about it, but I described it as the worst bad dream ever. I'm letting you know it was never a dream. I was wide awake and aware. So now, approximately 30 years later, I have the guts to at least report this to you in hopes that it may help someone or you guys with your research. I'm mentally stable. I have managed millions of acres of federal land as a primary land officer. I am a GS-13, 30-year federal employee with a staff of 30. I'm not some nutcase, and I'm scientifically trained. I've had no mental issues, no drug issues, and I have a very long and responsible career in family life, and I'm letting you know this actually happened. Now, this next account, an Italian eyewitness recalls his strange creature encounter in the summer of 2011. Now, he states, I'm here to tell you about a story, probably the most scary or terrifying story ever in my life. It happened about 6 years ago during the summer. One night, as has happened many times, I was coming back home late, a late night about midnight or 1 a.m. in my car. I want to say that I never used drugs and that I never smoked, so my mind is always very clear, always. At the time, I had come back to my car and I was parking. When I left my car, I felt strange. I felt very cold in my body, but it was summer. It was July, so it was very warm weather. But I felt very cold, especially in my chest and my stomach. And I felt like something was pressing on my chest. I had extremely strong feelings that something or someone was watching. So that was the first night, but this kind of thing had happened to me at different times in my life, so I didn't care. I just went home to sleep. Now, this event repeated the next day and then the next day. Every day, the presentation became stronger and scarier. It repeated for about 1 week. On day 4 or 5, I don't remember very well, these feelings became much stronger. And along with these feelings, there was another scary thing. I was hearing a noise that was like, footsteps. Heavy footsteps of a great animal or a man. Anyway, so that day I was very scared. These things happened the next day again. It was the 6th day of this event. Then the 7th day, the same as the night before. I went out and came back to my home with my car and parked. I got out of my car. I closed the door. I had very strong feelings. It felt very cold, but in a way that was never felt before in my life. Now I was scared because I knew at that time that someone was watching me. So I decided to stay, not go into the house, but to stay and try to understand what was happening, to see if there really was someone or something that was watching me. I heard again and again the steps, and they were very heavy. So I stayed and watched around the courtyard. I looked around and finally saw a scary sight. I see something. I see a creature. I saw this big shadow, a black shadow, and it was very big and very tall because I'm 6 feet 4 inches, and this shape, it looked much taller than me. The scariest thing was that it was not a shadow, but it was the big red eyes that this shadow had. They were very big and very shining, and it was watching me. And at the time, I was very scared, and I didn't know what to do. Do I run? Do I go to the shadow? I stayed paralyzed for some seconds, and I didn't know what to do. Now it started to walk towards me, and after probably 3 or 4 seconds, the shadow was almost to me. It was about 10 meters away. I was very scared, so I ran. I don't know why. I ran over to and behind the wall by my house, so I closed the gate to my garden. I closed the gate and I ran into my house. Now, in my house, the door is full of glass so that you can see out. And when I closed the door, I saw out through the gate. I saw the eyes. They were near my gate. They were still watching me. It was just very terrifying. And still now, when I talk about the story, I'm terrified. So at that moment, I was very scared and went into the other room for probably 5 minutes. And after I looked out the door, the eyes and the shadow weren't there. I went out to see, but since that moment, I've never seen that creature. I don't know what it was, but I know that it was real because I saw it for several seconds. I saw the eyes. I remember still the shape of the shadow, the eyes, and the noise of the steps. I've talked about this with only a few friends and family. So now, a month after these strange things happened to me, I saw similar web creatures. In the world, there have been many over the years, encounters with creatures that were called the Mothman. And when I saw the picture of this creature, it was really like the one I saw. It was really like it, so I don't know if it really was a Mothman. At the time, when I saw it the first time, I called it the Crow Man because it was like a big crow with a black shadow and eyes. I also searched if there were animals, real animals, that had red eyes at night. The fox has red eyes in the dark, but I don't believe it was that a fox could exist that was taller than me and that it could step with 2 feet like a man. And the eyes were very big, so I don't know what it was. Now, every time I tell my friends or family, I know about this story. I tell them that it was the only time in my life that I was really scared, and it was very real. So this next account, an experiencer contacted me about their ordeal with a black-eyed teenage boy who would manifest at night in their bedroom and continuously torment them. So this happened a long time ago in 2008 in Wolfdale, Pennsylvania. Now, I've had a pretty good life. Loving parents, 2 cool big sisters, lots of friends, and no bullies at school. I never wanted anything as my parents always got me any video game I wanted. But I got a story I never told anyone before. Not my parents, not my big sisters, not even friends, for fearing I'd be labeled crazy. I always slept with the TV on. Whatever bothered me at night would not bother me when the TV was on. But sometimes my parents would turn off the TV and things got weird. I was tormented for 3 years by this thing that could turn invisible. It looked like a very slender yet very toned teenage boy with black eyes, like one of those black-eyed kids. He wore a white tank top and baggy black sweats, but no shoes at all. He had cuts and scratches all up and down his arm. He was super pale as well. He had dirty blonde-colored hair. Before every time it appeared, I'd feel a sense of impending danger, panic, and doom. But like I said, it could turn invisible, so it was hard to gauge where it was in the room before it started messing with me. So it was hard to prepare myself. It also reappear and disappear constantly to mess with me. Now, this thing would scare me each time until I was so full of fear, like tears running down, waterfalls down both cheeks, trembling and heart beating like a drum, frozen stiff with fear and clinging to the sheets, or I'd make too much noise. Someone like my sisters or parents would come wondering what was going on. It'd do things like play tug of war with my blankets. It purposely let me think I'd win the tug of war before it just yanked them off the bed and throw them to the floor. It'd do things like jumping on the bed. It could mimic voices and noises. It would sometimes sneak up on me and make creepy sounds like animal growls and making monster noises from my video games and movies I'd like to play and watch, like the Tusken Raider noise from Star Wars. An even crueler trick it'd do was mimic door knocking and the voice of one of my big sisters coming to check on me before appearing and messing with me. It also often mock and taunt me in different voices. It also pinned me down and forced me to stare at those unsettling back voids it called eyes. I tried saying any kind of prayer to see if it would help, but it would just mock me. It sometimes let me run to the door before shutting it and putting all its weight on it so I couldn't open it. And it just be left there beating and banging on it in a sobbing, crying, whimpering, sobbing, terrified mess. This thing would have me so terrified, I couldn't even scream for help. I could only squeak out for help. It would sit on my chest, yank the pillow out from underneath my head, and start bobbing me with it on the one side, like a one-sided pillow fight. It tried pulling me under the bed a time or two. It would mess with my feet if they were out of the blanket or over the bed. It would tickle them, grab them tightly just to scare me, and 3 times it even bit my foot. Not hard enough to puncture the skin, but still. I'd do things like letting it hide under the blankets, thinking I was safe. Then I'd yank the blankets off first before plucking me off the bed a time or two and play airplane with me, tossing me up and down into the air. Sometimes it threw me back on the bed. Sometimes it just let me fall flat on the floor where I'd scramble to the door and run out of the room. On one of these times, I was able to go and wake someone up. Every other time, it let me get down the hallway, get me halfway out of the room before tripping me and dragging me back by the feet. It'd give me random bear hugs at times, like strong bear hugs. It'd give me headlocks and noogies from hell. It wouldn't bother anyone else in the house. I'd try ignoring it multiple times, but it didn't work. So anyway, one night I get down by the foot of my bed and start closing my eyes and praying as hard as I can. The whole time this thing's mocking me and punching me in the back. So the next thing I know, this thing lets out a super loud hissing sound like it's seriously hurt. And every light in my room turns on at once. Desk lamp, TV, ceiling fan light, and even the side bathroom light. Like brighter than what a light bulb would possibly be. It was so bright it woke up my one big sister down the hallway. But fortunately, I've never seen this horrible thing again. So a reader forwarded the following account from his childhood in which he and his friends encountered a tall, hair-covered human-like creature in blackberry bushes. I had a childhood friend, Johnny, whom I sometimes play with. We weren't the closest, but we were part of the same church, so occasionally spent time at each other's houses. We lived outside of town in a large house that sat near the woods. This wasn't at all strange to me, as many of my friends at the time, if not most, lived in similar circumstances, so it naturally became standard to play outside, hiking around the properties, the woods, the large fields in front of the house, whatever. Now, Johnny had a little brother, Stephen, who'd sometimes want to tag along. Frankly, I don't really remember much of how we'd play. Pretend, mostly, I'd assume. This was the early 1990s, and none of us were particularly well off families, and imagination was dirt cheap. Sometimes I really wish I could write off what I saw as imagination. It would be easier. So, this incident happened one summer, all those years ago. Johnny, Steven, and I were doing our usual walking around, talking, playing pretend, down at the bottom of one of the large fields that surrounded the house. I can remember how hot it was. The grass around us had long since dried. There was a sour smell in the air from all the pungent weeds and shrubs around us. The only things that remained green were the abundant brambles of blackberries that grew in huge towering clusters off to one side of the property. I can remember there was this little rotting shack made of dilapidated boards down there, and that's where we were, playing right near it and the blackberries. I had wandered just a bit away from them. It couldn't have been more than 10 feet. But that's when I glanced away and saw it. There was something in the blackberry bushes. I couldn't tell what it was, but I reacted as best as my childhood mind would allow me to and ducked behind the nearby shrub out of fear. Now, keep in mind, these blackberry bushes in front of me weren't small. Such clusters can often climb small trees and grow into a sort of wall of thorny bushes. These were probably anywhere from 8 to 10 feet high, and whatever this thing was, it towered over them at least a couple of feet. I could see its whole upper torso, arms, and head. It had thick black fur. It was clearly standing on 2 feet. And at that second, looked like a roof or something. Now, I'm sure at this second, you're probably thinking, okay, so this person saw a bear eating berries as a kid. Really scary. Well, but this thing wasn't a bear. I was raised near the woods. I was young, but I had seen plenty of animals. This thing was not a bear. Its shoulders, arms, and face looked very human-like, but it was distorted somehow, evil-looking. Frankly, I thought my young mind had at the time was saying just demon. The thing that was most striking, though, were the eyes. They were red, stark red, which I'm sure in text sounds cartoonish, but to a child, it might as well have been that death was right in front of me. And it did have that vibe. This thing was terrifying, and something inside me told me that it didn't run right, then I might not make it. If I didn't run off right away, I might not make it. So I bolted for the house, screamed for Johnny and Steven to run with me. They did, acting either on instinct at the sound of my voice or just playing along with the moment. At least I suspect Johnny was. Playing along, that is. Steven, being younger, seemed to pick up on my fear and was screaming for real as we all booked it to the house. The wind was very intense, whipping by my ears, and I couldn't really hear if the creature was in pursuit, but I dared not look back. Finally, we reached the safety of the house's deck and quickly ran inside. I tried to explain what happened to Johnny's parents, all about the demon I saw in the blackberry bushes. Of course, they treated me like a dumb kid. My parents seemed to entertain that I saw something, but not that it was supernatural. I've spent my life casually trying to understand what had happened. Every couple of years, the memory resurfaces like a reoccurring nightmare that never quite leaves you. The cynic in me insists that it was a bear or nothing, a figment of my overactive imagination. Now, we did like to pretend, after all, and it was very hot that day, not to mention, clearly, berries would explain the presence of a bear. But again, I knew the shape of a bear. And I've never heard of an hallucination that lasts a long time and can be viewed from multiple angles. Now, I've dabbled in a little missing 411 information over the years, and there have been reports of certain cryptids that match. I forgot the name, and I just tried looking it up, but couldn't find it. Apparently, that's some type of rumored Sasquatch that is larger than normal and said to have red eyes and an inclination toward carnivorism and aggression. Apparently, the legend goes that they like to twist people's heads off. As for what I saw, I suppose I'll never know. But I'll say this, I hope I never see it again. So, a Missouri coon hunter has a terrifying encounter with an unseen chattering being during a hunt. The dogs cowered and were trembling because of the incident. So, what was it? He writes, "This was told to me by my dad. First and foremost, my dad was not a believer in aliens, ghosts, Bigfoot, or portals, but this he couldn't explain away. And my dad was a coon hunter. He owned several dogs and had many friends that coon hunted with him. This happened in the late 1960s. He said one night he and a buddy took their dogs on a late night run. There's a small conservation area about 5 miles from our house with picnic tables and primitive campsites. A natural spring runs through the area, and it's just a beautiful place. He said they let the dogs out and were sitting on the tailgate of the truck listening to them run. He said they treed a coon, and he and his buddy walked to where they were. Now, these dogs are highly trained to stay at the tree and not to leave until we got there. They said they got the dogs leashed up and were starting for the truck when the dogs started whining and whimpering, acting completely out of character. His big male hound cowered down and took off breaking the hold my dad had on him. He said they heard a noise like nothing either of them had ever heard before. Now, mind you, these two men had been in Missouri woods all their lives. He said it was a growling noise and they could hear footsteps circling them. They both had headlights on and both tried to see whatever it was, but it kept out of the light. He said it started chattering like to itself and continued stalking them. He took his gun and he carried out and shot into the air a couple of times, and the stalking and chattering had just stopped. He said they took the dogs and quickly made their way back to the truck. Now, my dad's old male dog was there waiting for them. He said the dogs were acting so strange, cowering and trembling. They got their dogs loaded up, and when they checked the time, over 2 hours was missing. We said the tree the dogs were at wasn't very far from the truck, so walking to getting the dogs back to the truck would have been, 30 to 45 minutes at the most. He said they never discussed it with anyone but each other. He didn't tell me until I was grown. So after he passed, I asked my mom if he had told her what had happened that night and if he was scared. My dad was never scared of anything, but that he couldn't explain. He was pale just telling the story, she said. He said that they were stalked by something with heavy footsteps that chattered to itself. This was a late summer night in Rolla, Missouri. Now, the interesting thing about Rolla, Missouri, I have had a lot of Bigfoot reports in that area. And in fact, there's a white Bigfoot that hangs out there and has been reported to me on several occasions. So it wasn't the white Bigfoot, I don't believe, but the area is well known for Bigfoot activity. Now, this next account, the witness was hiking an old trail in western Oregon when it turned gray and blurry around them. The day turned into night as a hairy arm and hand emerged from the darkness. So they state, on this trip, I decided to hike the old Malala Indian Trail that followed the ridgetops from Saddle Blanket Mountain to Oak Ridge in Oregon, one of the Native American favored summer camps and trading centers. It was a beautiful August day. 2 days into the hike, I expected to be gone about 2 weeks, when literally out of the blue, the most terrifying thing that ever happened to me in my life occurred. It would change my perspective of reality forever. I was walking along the trail enjoying the strong breeze and bright sunshine when, in the middle of a step, everything around me started to turn gray and blurry. The only way I can describe it was as if suddenly I was looking through someone else's prescription sunglasses. I finished a step and started another. Every inch I moved forward, the darkness increased and the gray blurring turned into a jumble of shapes that made no sense. I then seemed to pass a barrier and everything started to return into focus. When my foot reached the ground on the second step, everything around me had changed. Day had turned into night and there was no wind. All the Douglas fir and pine trees had been replaced with thick jungle-like growth. The cool, thin mountain air was replaced with humid, thick air. There were no stars in the sky, but there was a diffused light that let me see everything clearly. However, I couldn't tell what the light source was. Now, as often happens when the human body receives a massive dose of adrenaline, the entire incident appeared like it was in slow motion, even though it was only there for a second or two. I had time to observe my surroundings. The silence was broken by continuous high-pitched screaming sounds, and I was nearly overwhelmed with a sense of fear and danger. My momentum carried me to take one more step before stopping in my tracks. It was at this point I heard a whispered, "Gotcha," over my right shoulder. I couldn't tell if I heard it with my ears or inside my head. The word wasn't directed at me, but something said the word quietly to itself. I was so terrified, I felt my heart stop for a moment. That whispered word is what saved me. I opened my mouth and gasped in a huge gush of thick air and recoiled backward in the same footstep I had entered wherever I was. As I threw myself backwards, I looked over my right shoulder. A dark-colored, hairy right hand and arm were reaching for my throat over my shoulder. The hand had pale ivory spade-shaped fingernails. The nails looked clean and almost like manicured. The thumb was placed lower than towards the wrist on the hand than a human's. Both hands and arms were thin and powerful looking, and both were covered with thick, coarse black hair. I got a good look at it because the thumbnail grazed my neck. It didn't break the skin as I moved backwards. And as I continued backward, the hand clutched where my neck had been a split second before, and it seemed to fade off into the distance as I returned through the portal. I took 2 more steps backwards and everything reversed itself from what had happened. The world around me became lighter. The fir and pine trees gradually came back to view, and by the 3rd step, I was back on Saddle Blanket Mountain. Now, I continued to move backward in terror, and as I did, I observed where I had just come from was a shimmering oval patch of air about the size of a large door. The woods behind it looked like it was underwater. But the 5th backward step, the shimmering area seemed to just evaporate, and everything was back to normal. But then my lungs had nearly burst from the volume of air I had just inhaled during the huge gas I had just taken. My body felt like it was on fire from the adrenaline surge. I spun around and ran back down the trail as fast as my legs could carry me, and I didn't stop until I reached my truck. It took nearly 2 days to get to that place and about 3 hours to get back. On my way home, I was absolutely horrified at the thought of what would happen if I were to drive my truck into something like that. It had been a trap, pure and simple. Whatever it was that tried to kill me somehow kept the portal hidden from me on the way in, and I didn't see it until I was back out again. I had terrible nightmares for years, and I still haven't come to grips with what had happened. My fingers are trembling, and the hair is standing up on the nape of my neck as I write this. Severely shaken, I read everything I could get my hands on about people who had mysteriously disappeared throughout history, and discovered several instances where people have vanished in plain sight of others. In quantum physics, people have a theory about parallel universes. So in the next account, starting in 1997, an abductee was taken repeatedly. He had no memory of it after it happened. At first, he wasn't sure what was going on. So he states, I began experiencing anxiety, fatigue, insomnia, periodic headaches, unexplained cuts, scars, rashes, and bruises. I began having strange, confusing flashes of memory. At first, they were just a terrifying jumble of fragmented images, sounds, and sensations. After a few years of thinking I was starting to crack up, they eventually started to come together and became more distinct and orderly. At this point, I have a clear memory of what happened. It usually happens around 2 a.m. or so. If I'm asleep, I wake up in a panic, unable to move. All my hair stands on end, and I feel an odd sensation, almost like an electrical charge flowing through me. It's very difficult to breathe. A blinding light shines in through the window, and tall, thin figures are standing all around me. I start hearing their thoughts in my head. Usually something like, I don't be afraid, or something like, don't be afraid, or there will be less discomfort if you stop trying to resist. I raise off my bed, float outside, and raise up into the light. There is where things get vary a bit. Sometimes they just do some type of scan. Other times they perform surgical procedures. I can remember having my head clamped in place and needles and other instruments inserted into my skull, ear, and up my nose. Other times into my forearms or abdomen. At some point, I lose consciousness and find myself back in my bed. I know there at least once that they came when I was awake. It happened 3 years ago in mid-September. I couldn't sleep, so I was watching Netflix on my computer. Next thing I know, I'm waking up the next morning. I remember thinking how odd it was that I don't remember going to bed. I made my way down the stairs where I noticed the door was open. I found my rifle lying on the front step next to 3 ejected rounds, all 3 still intact, except that their primers had been struck. So far, I have not regained a memory of what had happened that night. I'm not 100% sure if this is related, but I just had to reshingle my roof. I only put the new asphalt shingles on about 3 years ago, and they're already starting to curl up and crumble. They appear to be scorched. Now, this next account, the witness was with a friend and driving back to Arizona after visiting California. He observes a bizarre-looking creature that seems to have rotting flesh and other physical damage. He states, I'm 18 and my friend is also 18. Wanted me to take a few days off of school to go to California to go to Universal Studios. I live in Arizona near Phoenix and have never been to California. I had no problem with going to California, so I got my parents' permission to go. I spent a day at his house because we would have to leave the next day to make it and not waste a day just wandering around a hotel or a random place. So we take about a day to drive and we make it. So we spend about a day there. On the drive home on Interstate 10 near Loma Linda, California, it's nighttime and there's a long line of cars. It's because of people out of state were visiting. I look out the window and I see a figure that was over 6 feet tall, skinny, looked like a coyote, but sickly looking, just crouching behind a bush or something, but I do know it started poking its head out to look at me. It looked as if it had little or no ears on it, which caught me off guard, and it had white eyes like an undead zombie white eye. Something happened that made it turn its head, and I saw that it had sunken eyes. It had black or brown skin with hairs that looked fake and matted down fur on its face and head. Its neck looked like it had a gunshot hole hanging down from it, a rotting piece of flesh hanging also. The cheeks were torn and the rotting as well, with blood on the bottom and the top jaw and only maybe 10 teeth. Most were either slightly covered or somewhat covered in blood. This creature stood up slowly and looked at me, while doing so without moving an inch and walking in an almost straight path. I didn't mention what I saw to my friend. Since then, I've tried to sleep, but I just stayed up watching YouTube. I have not spoken to anyone else about this since it happened. Any idea what it was? Was it a zombie or an unknown humanoid? I have no idea what he saw, quite frankly. So that's the last account, folks. So if you have questions, I want to thank Win Nice for their $20 donation. Thank you. And I also thank Larry Sharp for becoming a member. Thanks again. Okay, let's get to the questions. You have to excuse me. Pollen's high today. Been bugging me all day. Anybody got any questions? Please put them in all caps too, if you can. Dagnammit. Regarding your first story, is it possible that Joker monster to be wearing clothing? It was wearing clothing. It had a it said it had some type of hooded jacket on. Other than that, I don't think it had much else. Look, I don't think they were really looking at the clothes. But I have heard similar stories before. Really bizarre. Anything else, folks? Audio. In your opinion, what part does consciousness play in these types of encounters? Do things change for each person possibly? Yeah, I think that's a very interesting statement because I think, let me put it this way. I have had witnesses see the same thing at the same time, but their individual perception in many cases is different than the other. Now, of course, other times, people say they see the exact same thing. But there have been instances where a witness would contact me, and I've talked to other witnesses as well and read other accounts, where one or two or three people would see something, report it, and it would look entirely different to each one of them. Now, is it the case where this thing changes or shows itself to certain people in certain ways? I don't know. I believe myself that just like the winged humanoid encounters in Chicago, I think it's a matter of perception. Even though for the most part, many of the sightings are very similar, there are some changes, and sometimes we get a really out of the wall type of description that just doesn't fit anything else. Said the last Jose Sanchez said the last story sounded much like a rake. As far as the description of rake, I don't use that description anymore. I just say pale crawler because, quite frankly, or pale or crawler humanoid. The rake description, the rake moniker is basically a creepypasta moniker that somebody had made up on a 4chan. So it kind of stuck, but yeah, I know what you're talking about, though. ACDC 5150. Lon, you familiar with the police officers? I saw 6 hooded monks walking through Monk Castle in Illinois. A very creepy place. A lot of stories. I have heard about that. I have heard of similar stories as well. Monks. I had, it's funny. I had an investigation I did on southeast Wales, and we were in a basement of this restaurant, and and I was on the computer, but the other witnesses were there doing the actual investigation. I was just observing. And we all saw 5 or 6 monks literally walking through the place going in through the wall. Now, of course, they were specters. I guess they were specters, but they were Cistercian monks. So the Cistercian monks used to wear, and that's from Norman times. So you're talking like almost 1,000 years ago. But that whole monk phenomena has been seen before. Jay, do you have very many accounts of cryptid plants, trees, or odd vines of woodlands? I do have some. Um, the ones I particularly remember are walking trees and plants that seem to feed on people, um, or supposedly feed on people, or it's been reported by the locals that it feeds on people. So, yeah, I have a few. Not a whole lot of them, but I do have a few. Jose Sanchez, if these creatures are shape-shifting, the perception theory may be viable. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know, but, perception's a funny thing. Um, there have been times when I've been in an investigation and we all do see something, but many times we just see it differently. Now, I don't know if it's because of my abilities or the abilities of the other person that they do see it differently. But it is kind of weird. Absolutely. Yeah, Marla said Little Shop of Horrors. Yeah, and in fact, I did liken that to some of those accounts, but even though that's fictional, but sometimes, sometimes we get accounts. The cat's jumping around on me here. Sometimes we get accounts where it does seem to mimic something in pulp culture or TV or something, just like the Predator phenomenon, the Glimmer Man. Audio. Have there been an uptick of Mothman reports in Chicago? Also, do you think the violence there and all the negative energy has something to do with the sightings? Well, there haven't been a whole lot of sightings lately. Since since we did the show was aired on TV, on Netflix, or on Unsolved Mysteries, I think we've got 3 or 4 reports. Now, I did contact Unsolved Mysteries. I did talk to some of the people there today, and they've got some reports that they're going to send out to us that the viewers did send to them. So you can be looking for those, and when I do get them and do get a few of them together, I'll go ahead and report them on here. Yeah, Marla was talking about the walking trees. I've had a lot of walking tree sightings. We had one down in Maryland, down near Towson, Maryland, several years ago. I even had video of it. So, yeah, it's kind of weird. I don't know exactly what it is. Some people say that it's a Bigfoot pulling the tree up and walking around with it. Well, I don't know if that's true or not. It would make sense, but not necessarily if that's what happened. Audio. Have you talked to Dave Eckert lately? Nope. David hasn't. I haven't talked to David in many months, quite actually, and he's got other things going on right now. So, and he's been away from home, so I probably won't talk to him for a good while anyway. But no, I haven't talked to him lately. Now, as far as in that last, and as far as violence in Chicago, I haven't found anything that suggests that that's related to the sightings. Though that would be kind of hard to determine, but no, I haven't really had any of the sightings reported that seem to correlate with the violence around the area. Yeah, Marla's Vinny's in the house. Yeah, Vinny decided to get up and walk around tonight. I don't know what that was all about. Vinny's getting old, so it's kind of hard for him to move around now, too. Anything else, folks? Okay, well, I want to thank everyone for coming in tonight. And if you donate, it's truly appreciated. Your support's what makes all this possible. So please like, subscribe, and share. And if you do have an encounter or like something to be put on the blog or read here, let me know. Send it to me at Lon Strickler, phantomsandmonsters.com. So until we meet again next week or next Friday, and we will do a show next Friday. I don't think anything is going on that's going to curtail that. But I will be back next week. So until I see you next week, you all have a safe weekend. And if you can, vote early. That's all I'm going to tell you. I'm not going to get political. Just say vote early. So y'all take care, and I'll talk to you soon. Night.